Please speak up. And we're a small enough group here. Also, please ask questions as we go. I might say I'll get to that in a second, but catch my attention if I don't see you. Okay, so I was asked to speak on this topic, and I did a bunch of review just to see how various people identify or define cow efficiency. What does that even mean? And I'll give you some perspectives from various people in the field, different ways of expressing cow efficiency. We've got biological ways, we've got economic ways, and I'm going to try to focus on economic efficiency because that impacts the bottom line. So again, back to our conference theme. I'm going to try to relate this to the conference theme. Growing grass to new heights, does your grass measure up? So how many of you were in the talk yesterday? So I'm going to try not to repeat myself too much, but you will hear a few of these same points. So I'm going to try to talk about connecting pasture productivity and to some extent pasture quality to carrying capacity and economic output, not so much per cow, but per acre. And I'll tell you why in a second. What is efficiency? How do I measure it? It's easy to do with growing animals, steers, stockers. But when we've got a cow-calf unit, it gets a little confusing. Are we going to exclude the data for the cow and just focus on the calf? How do we express efficiency? Do I express, we talk about biological efficiency, which is simply converting feed resource to calf weight. That would be biological efficiency. But we can talk about economic efficiency, converting our various investments, our various costs into calf gain, or really, if you want to be more complete, calf plus the value of any cull animals, any salvage mother cows. So do we express efficiency as income per cow, income per acre, or to be a little more comprehensive about it, income per unit of investment, whatever that unit of investment is across the whole enterprise? Or is there some other way? Some of you may be economists and much better at this than me, but it gets confusing because dollars per cow return is not the same as dollars per acre in many cases. So part of this depends on how do we have our investments spread across our various assets. Do we have a lot of money tied up in livestock, tied up in land, tied up in equipment and facilities? So depending on how we've got our assets or our investments spread over livestock, land, which of course in the case of those of us who are grazing is our forage source, labor and other resources helps us figure out, well, do we focus on dollars per cow, dollars per acre, or if we've got good enough bookkeeping, dollars per unit of investment in the whole enterprise, the whole package. So depending on how our investments are distributed across all these various resources, in the end, in my opinion, for pasture-based operations, I think there's still a fairly strong connection with dollars per acre because we've got fixed costs of land and fencing, water facilities, all the things that go along with that feed resource. Those are fixed costs, and I think we need to account for them. And so dollars per acre is probably a more useful index of economic efficiency than dollars per cow. How do we maximize biological and primarily economic efficiency of our operations? So I'll try to lead you through some of that from my perspective. So it gets complicated right from the very beginning, though, because if we think about raising animals on a pasture resource, we've got all these trade-offs that you're intimately familiar with between gain per animal, individual animal performance, gain per acre, net return. Those are three different things that happen at three different stocking rates if we're raising stocker animals, yearlings, growing animals. It gets a little simpler with cow-calf because we can focus pretty much on calves per land area, calves per acre, and some of the gain per animal issues go away. But we need to have some goals. We need to be clear on what we're doing and why. And that's going to be different for every one of us, but it's worth writing those things down and reviewing them periodically. Just wanted to emphasize one of the things we could do to increase economic efficiency of cow production is, of course, reduce winter feed costs. One way, effective way for many of us to reduce winter feed costs is to stockpile forage and graze through as much of the winter as we can. There's no question it's very challenging under many conditions, and sometimes it's hard to stockpile forage because we're trying to stockpile during August, September, when pasture growth rates are naturally kind of low compared to May and June, when it's easy to stockpile forage, but it's hard to carry that all the way into winter, plus it would be very low quality by the time we carry spring surplus into winter. So if we can do fall stockpiling for winter grazing, we can certainly reduce hay costs, increase economic efficiency. If we look at the overall biological efficiency of cow-calf sector of the total beef production market, we find about 50% of total feed inputs to the U.S. beef production system, about 50% go to maintaining the cow herd. And we break it down here, but about 50% of total feed in the U.S. beef system goes to maintaining the mother cow herd. Excuse me. Some of your other talks on this whole cow efficiency in the series that have been going on yesterday and today probably talked about breed efficiencies. Here's some data from Clay Center, Nebraska. This is feedlot conditions, but we're looking at various breeds here. Smaller animals, larger animals, 1,100 pounds to 1,500 pounds. And what we find is, in general, these animals are consuming somewhere around 9,000 pounds of dry matter per year. Might be a little bit more on a forage basis than on a feedlot basis, but somewhere around 9,000 pounds. And you look over here at weaning weights, anywhere from 370 to 440 or so, depending on 470, depending on the breed. So about a 100-pound difference due to breed, smaller animals, larger animals. But let's come to efficiency here, and they got a little bit of a word wrap problem. That's meant to be pounds of weaned calf weight per 100 pounds of, I believe that's feed, pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed per pound of dry matter consumed. So we're down around 4%. So of this forage or feed that's consumed annually by the cow, we're only capturing about 4% of that, 3-4% of that, 5% of that maybe in the weaned calf. So it's an inherently inefficient system. I think we all acknowledge that, agree with that. We understand that because we're maintaining the mother cows year round just to get that calf product. No big surprise. Harlan Ritchie, and I'll come back to Harlan Ritchie in a second. He's retired, but he's emeritus at the Department of Animal Science University, Michigan State University, summarized the findings of a conference that was held back in the 80s on this very topic, beef cow efficiency. And he talks about definitions of cow efficiency. Lean calf weight per pound of cow weight per cow exposed, lean calf weight per unit or pound of feed energy consumed, net return per cow-calf unit or to the entire beef cattle enterprise. So there are lots of ways to express efficiency. One of the things that they found in this conference, I'll give you the details in a second, is Even though we have these differences in cow size, 1,100 pounds up to 1,500, 1,600 pounds, there is no correlation between mature mother cow size and biological efficiency. You can find that 4% efficiency or so equally across smaller and larger animals. What they did find at this conference, though, is depending on your environmental conditions, your feeding conditions, if we've got a liberal feed supply, more than adequate feed supply, good quality feed, relatively low stress environment for the mother cows, there may be an advantage to larger, heavier milking types. They may be a little bit more biologically efficient than smaller animals. Okay, so that's under ideal conditions. Now,
Why would that be the larger cow would be more efficient?
Because she's converting a lot of resources into a bigger calf. So bigger cow weans a bigger calf. That ratio is the same as a smaller cow weaning a smaller calf. So pounds of calf per body weight of mother cow wind up being the same, whether it's a big animal or a small animal. Now, if we get into restricted feed supply, shortage of feed, harsher environmental conditions, the animals are having to climb hills and do more work, then maybe a moderately sized to even small animal with lower milking ability may be better at efficient. So it depends a lot on your environment. You match the cow to the environmental conditions to your operation, and that might lead some of us to have big cows and others of us to have small cows. But what they found beyond these body size type issues is big differences in reproductive rate among breeds, among herds, among management styles. Big differences in reproductive rate tend to impact cow efficiency much more than all the other factors, including calf weight, weaning weight, feed consumption. So think about reproductive success and think about longevity of cows in your herd. You keep them for 5, 6 years, 8, 10 years. So the longer you can spread the calf-bearing lifespan of your cattle out for the investment you made in bringing them to breeding status to begin with, the more efficient you're going to be. So here was the Beef Cow Efficiency Forum held in 1984. Thank you, HR. My vision's not very good. At Michigan State University and Colorado State University, back to back. Focus was on factors relating to beef cow efficiency and ideas to assist beef producers in making better genetic and management decisions. You can find this document online. It's still got a lot of current ideas in it. One of the editors was Harlan Ritchie, the person I just cited. So I went through it, I scanned through it briefly, and in 153 pages, there was virtually no references to the use of pasture as a feed resource. And I thought, that's kind of strange. Why wouldn't pasture figure prominently in a topic like this? But in 1984, it was not part of the conversation. So I got to ask myself, well, here we are in 2017. Do pastures have more of a connection now with cow efficiency than they did back then? Have economics changed? Have other factors changed? And so I'm going to ask, why do we focus on pastures as a feed resource? Number one, we all know it's the lowest cost per pound of forage consumed of any feed source. It's lower cost than hay, it's lower cost than silage, it's lower cost than concentrates. If you think about hay dry matter, on average, being something like maybe 12 cents a pound, 10 to 12 cents a pound of consumed dry matter. Pasture is going to come in, if you include all your costs, full accounting. Pasture is going to come in at something like a half to maybe 2/3 of that. Some people would say even cheaper. Some people would say 1/3 of that, 4, 5, 6 cents a pound. So that's the reason most of us use pasture as a resource. Animals are doing the work instead of us and machinery. Pasture can easily be higher nutritional value than harvested forage. We see that all the time. Young vegetative pasture There's no question it's higher digestibility, higher protein, lower fiber than the best hay and silage we ever put up. Now, that's not so important for cows. It is important for calves. Now, when we get to that a few months into their lives and they're starting to convert forage to gain, well, the nutritional value is suddenly very important to the calves. Pasture doesn't require expensive harvesting equipment, but as I spoke with one of the audience members yesterday, we can use harvesting equipment to capture the spring surplus. Think of that as a pasture management tool, if nothing else. So that can make economic sense. Raising animals can utilize hilly or rough land that isn't suitable for machinery operations. I think we all deal with that. So, pasture-related steps for improving cow efficiency. I'm going to sort of make the assumption that because we have land costs, fencing costs, water costs, all that stuff that's fixed goes with the land, I'm going to assume that we want to maximize carrying capacity of those pastures. We'd rather carry an animal to the 1 or 2 acres than an animal to 4 or 5 acres. So I'm going to focus on how do we manage to convert solar energy, the free energy that's driving our whole system and other resources to economic returns from calves. How do we improve pasture productivity, seasonal yield distribution, length of the grazing season to minimize feed costs. How do we manage the environment, forages, animals, calving dates, labor to meet nutritional requirements, and in italics here, without overfeeding the calves. How do we assign energy to the calves? Without overfeeding the cows. How do we assign energy to the calves for gain without overfeeding the mothers? Talk about that. Budget forage to generate products that meet market requirements, capture economic opportunities. So part of what I'm talking about here is we tend to be spring calving cow-calf operators. Well, what if we're willing to bear the costs of being a fall calving operator, having to carry those calves through the winter? Can the improved marketing opportunities for fall calves offset the cost of carrying them through the winter, the risk of carrying them through the winter? Something to think about. Supplement, at least the calves, we hope we don't have to supplement the cows much, as necessary from least cost sources, including purchased hay. Often purchased hay is less expensive than making your own hay, partly because hay growers, hay sellers are often selling their hay for too cheap, in my opinion. There's a bargain to be had out there buying hay from people who don't account for all their costs. They don't keep records. They'll say sell hay for $60, $70 a ton. You can't make money doing that. You're giving the hay away. So if you can buy hay for $60 or $70 a ton, that's probably cheaper than trying to make it yourself. Talked about this yesterday. I won't talk about it quite as much today. But let's just consider pasture as a solar panel capturing free energy from the sun. And I want to show you, here's an image where with a little light meter we can tell we're capturing about 95% of the sunlight energy that's hitting the top of the canopy. Only 5% of it is actually getting all the way through the ground. In terms of plant physiology, that's the most efficient level of forage, height of forage, density of forage, whatever it may be. It depends on whether it's flat-oriented leaves or upright-oriented leaves, grass versus legume. But if we're capturing about 95% of sunlight energy, that's what leads to the highest pasture growth rates throughout the season so that we maximize total season forage dry matter production. Okay? And you can actually eyeball and get good at this. You walk pastures and compare that with this, where things have gotten to hay stage. Some people do this on purpose. Most of us deal with this because spring pastures get away from us. We can't keep up with them. We're not stocked heavily enough to keep up with them. Here's 99 or 100% light interception. What that means is no light is getting through to the bottom of the canopy. So the bottom of the canopy is dying and falling apart and going back to the soil as litter, while the top of the canopy is still converting sunlight to forage tissue. And so the growth rate on this stuff is actually close to zero, because the top of the canopy is having to send energy to the bottom of the canopy to keep it alive. So the previous picture, we had a higher growth rate, more forage per acre per year than we do here. So, once again, how many of you have your sticks? Hold up a stick if you got a stick. Only one person? 2 people. All right. So here are some images here where we're in that 90-95% light capture. What would you say the height of, what's the height of this pasture? If you're going to measure it with a stick.
About 10 inches.
10 inches. Okay, so what's your stick say, or what's your memory say? That amount of forage dry matter per acre would be 10 inches. What's the stick say? Is it low, medium, or high density pasture?
Probably
Medium density, okay, so you go to that column. Who needs to borrow a stick? Anybody?
36.
Give it to Noah, he can read it.
There's the chart. Go to the chart. 10-inch height, medium density pasture. How much forage do we have standing dry matter per acre? 3,000.
36.
Yeah. Okay. And if you think about that, well, that's 300 pounds per acre per inch of height. I can carry that number around in my head. I don't even need a stick. Okay. And I know 10 inches is the top of my boot. Okay. So you can do a lot of this just with your eyeballs. Okay. What do you think it is here? What's the height here? Now we're getting up into that 99% light capture. You might think intuitively, oh, that's good. That's efficient. We're getting all the sunlight energy. But the growth rate's lower, the forage quality is lower. What do you think the height is here?
Probably about 18 inches.
18 inches, okay. And do we even have those numbers on our stick? How come? Why is the stick stopped at 12 inches? Why doesn't it go to 18?
You had 12 and 8 together.
Maybe. But part of the point of the stick stopping at 12 inches is it's no longer pasture beyond 12 inches. It's hay. Okay? So we're grazing a hay crop. Maybe that's good, but we're going to get a lot better total forage production per acre per year, better carrying capacity in this kind of condition than here. So here's some more extremes. If we're overstocked, so-called intensive grazing, some people like to think of intensive grazing as hitting plants hard, frequently, grazing close. We're not wasting any forage. We're not leaving any residue. We're turning our fertility and our sunlight and our water into forage. Okay, but you can see the animals aren't gaining. You got ribs. You can see the forage isn't covering the ground very well in terms of potential for soil and water conservation. We got weed invasion. We're not set up for drought because the roots are very shallow on these plants. If there's not enough top growth to support root growth, the roots get their energy from the tops. If we don't have much in the way of tops, we don't have much in the way of roots. Get into a drought, our roots are shallow. Here the roots would be much deeper. We'd be better prepared to encounter and get through a drought. But again, this forage is so tall, the bottom of the canopy is falling apart even though the top is growing. And in both cases, we have very low growth rates, okay? Near zero in both cases. So neither one is ideal. We'd like to be in between those conditions for pasture productivity, carrying capacity. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's think about the roots just a little bit. The roots, the perennial forages. This, by the way, is annual forage. This is wheat, winter wheat. This is wheat grass, which is a perennial. Flatgrass is a relative of this intermediate wheatgrass. But look at the density and depth of the roots in these perennials. We want to maintain that density and that depth for water uptake, for nutrient uptake. And the way we do that is we make sure the tops are thriving and productive so they can send surplus energy to the roots. We talk a lot about let's get enough legumes in our pastures to supply free nitrogen from the atmosphere so that we can have productive grass legume mixtures without having to use fertilizer nitrogen. We might have to spend a little less money than we would spend on nitrogen on phosphorus and lime in order to encourage the growth and development of the legumes, but that's money well spent. Typically, we target somewhere around 30 to 40% legume is kind of ideal in a mixture in terms of diet quality, nitrogen fixation, maybe deeper rooted plants if it's things like alfalfa or red clover. Okay, so one way to tell, just sort of an aside here, one way to tell whether your legumes, clovers, alfalfas, bird's foot trefoil, are effective at fixing free nitrogen from the atmosphere is if you can gently dig up a few plants. You can't just tear them out of the ground because you'll tear these nodules off, but if you can gently dig up some plants, sort of tease the soil off, look for nodules. Those are the nitrogen fixing sites where atmospheric nitrogen that permeates through the soil is converted into ammonium. Well, slice some of those open, pinch them open with a fingernail, slice them open with a blade. Here's some nodules. If they're whitish on the inside, even though we see nodules, if they're whitish, they're not fixing nitrogen. They weren't inoculated with the right bacteria. Okay? If they're pinkish, they are fixing nitrogen. So those are called effective nodules. Those are ineffective nodules. If they're blackish, they're dying. They're not effective. Somehow they've lost their effectiveness. So you want to see pink.
Can I ask a quick question
Yeah,
about
yes,
that?
absolutely.
They say that every so often you ought to let your pasture field go to where the clover seed can go back into the soil.
Sure.
So if that seed that goes back into the soil
Yes.
wasn't inoculated, then it would be ineffective?
No, because there's still, that's a great question. There'd still be some resident bacteria. The
Okay.
right species would be in the soil.
Okay.
Because we inoculated the first seeding we did, or some seeding we did. And so those bacteria are going to be in the soil.
Okay.
But what you can't do is trust them to be in a native soil that's never had legumes. Let's say you take it out of grass or wheat or soybeans. May not have the appropriate bacteria, and so that's where you got to get the right inoculum to go with the seed if it's not pre-inoculated.
Thank you.
Good question. Talked about bird's foot trefoil as a choice, and I forgot to mention yesterday, Sericea lespedeza. Many of us think of Sericea lespedeza as this very woody, kind of weedy-looking plant. We can't imagine how could that ever contribute to livestock gain. But Auburn University, AU, has had a Sericea lespedeza breeding program for 20 years, and they've successfully released better and better, leafier and softer Sericea lespedezas over the years, to the point where the current one is AU Grazer. It's fine, it's got pliable stems, it's grazing tolerant, it's palatable, and like bird's foot trefoil, it has tannins in it. Tannins in the right concentrations, moderate concentrations. Tannins are the things that make tea and wine astringent or in oak bark. Tannins bind proteins in the rumen and help the animal utilize forage protein more efficiently, so less of it's excreted in urine and dung, more of it goes through the animal for productive purposes. So that's one of the advantages, reasons to think about Sericea lespedeza and bird's foot trefoil as, again, increasing efficiency of converting your forage to animal products.
What kind of yields can you expect?
For bird's foot trefoil and Sericea lespedeza, half to 2/3 of what you get with alfalfa. So if you could get 6 tons of alfalfa per acre per year under good management, you get 3 from these other legumes. Alfalfa remains by far the most productive forage legume grass, no question. if the deer don't get it all. You might also want to think about some of the non-leguminous forage or broadleaf herbaceous plants like chicory, deep-rooted. They can explore the soil profile, perhaps bring up some minerals that the shorter rooted grasses and legumes don't. Okay, what about if we've got toxic tall fescue pastures? Well, we don't quite know, but animal performance isn't what we think it ought to be. Here's an example of animals seeking, well, they'd like to seek shade, but we don't have shade here, but they're at least seeking water. They're not eating, they're not gaining. Tall fescue toxicosis. This is probably expressed more the farther south you go than it is here in West Virginia, but we have it in West Virginia. So one of the solutions, and I think most of you are aware of this, is we can remove the endophyte, the fungal organism that lives between the cells in the leaves of tall fescue. We can remove that endophyte. It's called endophyte-free tall fescue. But even better, we can substitute that toxic endophyte with a different endophyte that still gives the plant all the benefits of endophyte infection, which makes it more stress tolerant, drought tolerant, insect pest tolerant. There's advantages to the plant to being endophyte infected, but we have these novel endophytes that are non-toxic now to the cattle. So there are various products out there, Estancia, Bar Optima, Max Q, Martin 2, there are 4 or 5 out there. Novel endophyte, all the advantages to the plant of endophyte infection, but none of the disadvantages to the livestock. Also want you to think a little bit about meadow fescue that's kind of coming on. A lot of work has been done in Wisconsin where meadow fescue was rediscovered a few years ago, 10, 12 years ago, led to a breeding effort. Meadow fescue looks very much like tall fescue. I can't tell them apart. I'm not good enough to be able to do that. But it only contains the non-toxic alkaloids if it's infected with endophyte. Only contains the non-toxic alkaloids, so no adverse animal health effects from the toxic alkaloids or the valines. Highly winter hardy, good drought tolerance, high fiber digestibility. That's the basis on which it's being promoted. More palatable than tall fescue, but less productive. So again, trade-offs. Consumption equal to tall fescue. Hidden Valley is the one that has been slated to come onto the market maybe in the next year or two. Peter, do you happen to know if that's actually happening? I don't know if you deal with Hidden Valley out of Castler's breeding program.
We are developing that one, but meanwhile there are a number of other varieties that are on the market.
Okay. All right. And here, just Charlie Opitz, the dairy operator in Wisconsin, kind of rediscovered, led the effort to research and study this meadow fescue that was found growing in remnant areas on his farm. Now, whatever you might purchase for improving species composition of your pastures, I really encourage you to look for certified seed. We have a terrible habit in the forage world of buying and planting common seed. We don't really know the genetics of it. We don't know the potential performance of it. It's cheap seed, and we do way too much of that. Buy certified seed, whenever you do. Just talk about fertility for 1 second. If you see patches out on the landscape like this, you can see, well, part of my pasture is doing much, much better than the rest. What are all these patches?
Cowpeed.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a close-up. Okay, so it might be phosphorus, it might be sulfur, it might be nitrogen. It's probably nitrogen or sulfur. Hard to tell just looking. But that tells you you have a background deficiency in your pasture if it's only doing well in the clumps where there's been urine deposition. Well, let's see if we can get the whole pasture to the point where you don't see these clumps anymore. All right, we can talk a lot about forage allocation methods, continuous, various forms of rotational or strip grazing, mixed species, strip grazing, buffer grazing, where we put in a temporary fence, set off part of the pasture and harvest the surplus as hay or silage. I'm not so concerned or as concerned with the method as I am with getting the stocking rate right. If we can figure out how many animals per acre per year, if we can figure that out for whatever method we're using, in my opinion, that's a much more important variable to be working towards. And see if you can increase it gradually over years. You know, can we carry an animal to the 2 acres, an animal or cow-calf pair per 1.5 acres? Can we even dream about carrying a cow-calf pair per acre, possibly? Somewhere in that range. Those are things we can improve. Now, let's look at when we compare continuous with rotational stocking, depending on the number of paddocks we have, determines the number of days that animals remain in the subdivision. If we have no paddocks, animals are in the pasture all the time. If we have 2 to 4 paddocks, they might be in the pasture for up to 2 weeks. If we expand to 3 to 7s, or even to 8 or 10, they might only be in a subdivision for 2 to 3 to 4 days, 5 days, something like that. And so we start picking up more and more efficiency of utilizing the forage as we go from continuous, where we're maybe using 1/3 of the forage we're growing, to 2 to 3 days, even 1 day occupation. That's a lot of paddocks. Where now we're getting up to 50, 60% efficiency in utilizing the forage. If you were to go out and make hay, or haylage or baleage, what percent of the forage you grew do you think you're getting into the bale? Mechanical harvesting. Here we are up at 70, 75. What would it be if we didn't use cattle at all and we just harvested, dried it, and weighed it? 90%, maybe a little less, 80, 85%. Okay, so we're starting to approach the efficiency of mechanical harvesting here if we're going to move animals twice a day, which most of us probably aren't. But dairy operators do this in many cases. So let's just talk about a few of the impacts of continuous versus rotational stocking. One of the things we often find in continuous stocking is we get these patches that are patch overgrazed and patch undergrazed, depending on the species. If this is toxic tall fescue, that would be a typical appearance later in the season. And so we have these non-uniformities of utilization as one of the issues under continuous stocking. You can solve that by stocking very heavily. Here we're overstocked, so they graze everything because they have no choice. But that's back to one of the earlier pictures we looked at, where pasture growth rate is very, very low. Pastures are suffering, roots are shallow. There's animals aren't doing very well. There's no particular great advantage to that, even though we are getting uniform utilization.
Would you want to do that if you were going to say, if you were going to go in and add seed to that field in the fall?
Oh, sure. Strategically, absolutely. If you're trying to eliminate the competition so that you can no-till seed or broadcast seed and trample seed in, absolutely. This would be a strategic grazing operation for that one purpose. Yeah, we could do that. Absolutely. No question. Or if you have animals that have gotten overly conditioned, overly fat, you want to shrink them back down, get them to lose 100 or 200 pounds, there's nothing wrong with restricting their intakes by putting them on something like this, as long as they've got calves. Make sure the calves are getting adequate forage. And so that gets into creep feeding. If we've got creep gates where the calves can get through from this condition, they can still come back and nurse or suckle, but they can creep over to either a trough with a supplemental feed, could be corn silage, could be concentrates, could be hay. They can go back and forth between a high quality, high quantity feed resource and the mothers who are being restricted. So there's another way. I wouldn't restrict the mothers this much. But there's another way. You can increase cow efficiency. We're not overfeeding the cows, but we've got to make sure the calves are getting more than just the milk from these restricted cows. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's an example of 400, I think these are heifers, on a allocation, just portable fencing for one day, where the animals are moved every day. So there are all kinds of things you can do. Flexible management. It takes the operator 15 minutes to put up a new fence and allow these cows to move. That's not a lot of time. Example of a creep gate here. I've never actually seen one of these, but here's a strip grazing thing that crawls along on a solar-powered little pair of tractors, and so every 30 minutes the animals get another little allocation. It'd be fun to see. Anyone ever seen one of those? Ladies makes them and sells them. Same outfit that makes robotic milking units. Okay, let's look briefly at a few data slides, and then I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to look at continuous versus a moderate level of rotational grazing intensity versus a high level of rotational grazing intensity. This is University of Arkansas, Southwest Arkansas, the Hope Station, where the animals are on warm season grass, Dallas grass, Bermuda grass. So under continuous grazing, all they get is that warm season grass. Under a moderate rotational management strategy, they're getting part of the pasture is being set aside, stockpiled for winter grazing, and the winter grazing area is interseeded with winter wheat and annual ryegrass. So there's a higher level of management intensity to create more feed on the same number of acres. These are both at the continuous and the moderate are at 2 acres per cow. The high rotational is exactly the same strategy as the moderate rotation, but this is 1 acre per cow-calf pair. So let's look at birth weights are the same, weaning weights are essentially the same, 230, 220, same, no differences. Okay, now let's look at body weight wean per hectare. Hectare is 2.5 acres. And you'll see, as you go from the continuous stocking, 200, and what's that say, HR 293. 281, so there's no real difference between continuous stocking and this higher management intensity program on the same stocking rate, so 2 acres per cow. But when we go to the higher stocking rate, we're up, we've increased weaning weight per hectare from 280, 290 up to 540. So there are things you can do within the same acreage to carry more animals. And as long as you don't over-assign feed to the mother cows, make sure it gets allocated somehow to the calves, you can increase calf production per acre. Now, we're going to look at some economics here in a second, but let's look at hay feeding. And I'm going to boil this down very quickly. If we look at hay fed, pounds per cow, dollars per cow, hay cost, the hay cost is a lot higher in the continuous stocking treatment, $125, than it was in the moderate and highly managed rotational stocking systems where we had the stockpiled winter forage, the winter wheat, the annual ryegrass as supplemental forage. So big differences, and a lot of that's due to the lower utilization efficiency in or under continuous stocking. So big differences in cost and very hay feeding cost. Now, let's look at total economics. So A is on a per cow basis. B is on a per hectare basis. So these are dollars per cow, dollars per hectare. And if you look at the continuous stocking is black, the moderate rotational program is the middle one in gray, the highly management intense rotational stocking is in white. So if you look at, this is net returns to land, labor, and management per cow. There's a little bit of advantage to, these are costs. These are total costs. Net returns, there's a little bit of advantage to the highly managed rotational system relative to the moderately managed rotational system, and they're both higher net returns per cow than the continuously stocked program. Now, if you come down here, returns per acre, just another way to think about efficiency. You take your paper, blend them, probably. Net returns, these are again costs, but net returns dollars per acre, dramatically higher returns from the more intensively managed, more densely stocked rotational system, about twice the net returns per acre than from the other two. And so you can take your pick, well, what's more important to me? Returns per acre, returns per cow, and in this case, you're not gonna go wrong. Either one reflects the other. Now, we can get to the point where we're overstocked, trying to carry too many animals, and it's going to go back down. So this happens to be approaching probably what the optimum stocking rate would be for economic return. Yeah.
When you, let's say you overstock.
Yes.
Aren't you also doing damage to the soil?
Oh, certainly.
And the plants?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Allow that.
Yeah. So there's no economic benefit to overstocking, and there's certainly no environmental benefit to overstocking. Yeah. You're degrading the resource. Absolutely. Let's look at one other example, and then I've probably got to skip through a few more slides. Carl Hovland at University of Georgia did some similar work comparing continuous and rotational stocking on end-of-fight free, that's what E- means, end-of-fight free, non-toxic tall fescue, in mixture with Bermuda grass, 3 years worth of data. We're going to look at continuous versus rotational stocking. Cow weights at weaning were the same. Stocking rate, cow-calf units per acre, in other words, 2 acres per cow-calf unit here, a little less than 2 acres under rotational stocking. Pregnancy rates were the same. Calf weaning weight in pounds were the same. Calf production pounds per acre, again, higher for rotational stocking by about 1/3. Winter hay fed pounds per cow, a lot higher for continuous stocking. So you can see the impact on cost, you can see the impact on returns, and there are an awful lot of studies that would show very similar data. If you look at the quantities of forage, the pasture masses that were available to animals, as you go across the dates here, Bermuda grass, it didn't seem to matter much whether it was continually stocked or rotationally stocked, but for tall fescue and the total mixture, there was more forage available. These are the same stocking rates now. There was more forage available from rotationally stocked pastures than continuously stocked pastures. And so that's part of the reason we can carry more animals, generate more calves per acre. Virginia data would show the same thing. I won't spend time going over them. I want you to think about one more element where we can control and restrict access of forage to the cows who don't need high quality and quantity of forage during their dry period or the first few months of gestation. We can restrict them with a leader, follower, or first last raiser kind of a program. It's somewhat complicated. It takes high management skill to do this. I've only met 2 or 3 people who can do it really well, but it's something you can get better at. So if you have the cows, if you can hold the cows back, in this case it's yearlings, but it'd be the same idea with calves. Calves can go through under the single wire fence to be the first grazers on the next strip that you're moving to. They can take 1/3 or 1/2 or graze selectively, get the highest quality. Then you move them ahead, you bring the cows in to consume what's left, the calves left behind. Cows have less quantity, lower quality, so that you're not overfeeding the cows, but you're letting the calves get high nutrition. Same concept as creep feed. And these data would show there's an advantage. I think I'm going to give you a 1 minute summary here. We compared at Reedsville. We had the question, as we're coming out of wintering heifers, replacement heifers on hay that we fed on pasture. We had stockpile grazing during January, December and January, after which we were feeding hay. We wanted to know, okay, well, when do we resume grazing in the spring on the adjacent pastures? Do we start early April, mid-April, late April, does it matter? And so we subdivided some exposures into thirds, and we graze a third in early April, another third in mid-April, another third in late April. And then we looked at the subsequent regrowth and total growth for the entire season following these 3 treatments. Did it have any impact on total season forage production? And very briefly, if you look at the data, what we found is when we go April 9th to April 19th to April 29th, and you sum up total season forage production, all the clips, all the grazings, all the utilizations, we went from 9,600 to 10,000 to 11,500 pounds of forage dry matter per acre. So what we learned is we were penalizing the total season forage production by grazing early when the new growth was still short and sensitive to defoliation. If we were willing to wait another 15, 20 days, which means continuing to winter feed hay, so you got to balance those costs. If we were willing to wait, we gained about 2,000 pounds of forage, about a ton of forage dry matter per acre per year. So there's another aspect to think about in terms of, again, economic efficiency of carrying a cow herd year-round. Last slide. Think about, put all these concepts together. Think about managing pasture as a crop. It's not just a land area. It's not just a holding area. It's not a feedlot. It's a crop. Just like wheat and barley are crops, canola is a crop, and we manage them accordingly. So think about managing pasture as a crop. And as you start thinking, you realize, wow, this takes a lot of management. I'm now into management intensity. I'm doing all these things that benefit the pasture, benefit the carrying capacity, benefit calf gain, benefit economic efficiency. That's what management intensive grazing means. Some additional information for those of you who can get a hold of the slides, and I'm happy to share these slides with you.
Any questions?
Yes.
On the one where you were showing in April,
Yes.
3 different dates.
Yes.
You get to the point where, because you held everything off, that it gets too mature and so you end up having to make hay out of it? Or are you better to
Great
take
question.
just
Great.
a little bit off?
No, great question. No, we were intentionally letting the animals in early April when the forage was only 1.5 inches high. And then 10 days later it was 3 inches high. And then 10 days later it was 5 inches high. So it was still young vegetative material. But you're right, if we had waited until May when the forage was a foot or 1.5 feet tall, it could very well have gotten away from us. And then that's where we would come in, assign part of it to hay or silage making, and restrict the area that we're grazing.
And had you pastured that through the winter, or?
We had. So we put up the exclosures in March to keep the animals off during the month of March. But during February, January, February, as we were feeding hay on the pastures, they had access to the whole area. There wasn't much to eat, but starting in late March, you get the new regrowth, and it doesn't matter how good the hay is, they're going to go hammer that new regrowth. So we excluded them from that new regrowth for a month, and then let them come in those 3 different days. Yes, question?
The exact same line, so then if they were grazing that whole field through winter,
Yep.
basically rolling hay or whatever you're
Yep,
doing, then you basically put them onto like a lot situation.
That's
We
right.
just had to pay exclusively.
That's right.
And then, so basically, the year.
Well, we didn't put them onto, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. We didn't put them onto a lot. We just excluded part of the pasture with a portable, temporary fence.
So basically, what you just said, we do about like 3 inches of road.
Yes.
Summertime of year.
Okay.
Yep,
Like some of our hay fields that we graze, don't graze in the winter, so
Yep.
they're already,
Yep.
like here,
Yep.
down,
Yep.
where they're actually.
right,
down.
right, right, yep.
I don't mean to cut you off, you can stay here and talk, but I gotta get this tore down, we gotta get ready for your next session. Okay? You can come up and talk to me if you want to, we gotta get the walls tore down, all back up to your final.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.